Hey, warm up from the low. Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Craig Hoops Peterson, now part of the Beast and Family Podcast. And we've got an excellent podcast for you. Joining me in segment number 2, we're going to have Blake Lovell aboard. He does great work over at Southeastern 14. We're going to be diving in with him on the Final Four and what we're all going to be getting in those two games and just what he's made out of this run that Alabama has had. We're going to ask him a little bit about NC State as well, and then we're also going to be taking a look at some of these coaching hires. And in the final segment, I'm just going to give you guys a few minutes on what we've seen in the coaching carousel. This is not going to be some sort of super duper deep dive or anything like that, but we're going to take a look at some of the moves that have been made. Like, we did see Chris Mack officially post up on the old Twitter/X that he is heading on over to Charleston, which I think is a good move. We're just going to be diving in on some of the places that are currently available. I'll only do about 10 to 15 minutes on that. It's not going to be super expansive because you're going to get a podcast every single day here in the off season. So have no fear. These coaching moves, they are all going to be broken down. We don't need to try to fit it in the next few days because we'll have 7 months to be able to break those down. And trust me, I will be breaking down every single one of them. There's going to be a conference preview for every single conference here on this podcast during the off season. So we will very much have you covered there. We're just going to be scratching the surface today and diving in a little bit more in the coming weeks and coming months as we prepare for what is going to be a tremendous 2024-25 season, but we still have a couple stones left to be unturned here for the 2023-24 season. So we're going to recap what we all saw in the NIT here in the first segment, as well as we've got one more NIT game that is now up there on the board with Indiana State versus Seton Hall doing battle. So we'll take a look to see how we got there. And if you ever do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at Juden_D1. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire on whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Didn't get in any Twitter/X questions today, but was fun to be able to take a look at the NIT yesterday. Let's dive in, try to find some trends, and try to get to know these teams a little bit better.
Games from yesterday is Greg buzzing about. Here is the rowdy recap.
And these smaller tournament DK Network write-up picks have been treating us very well. The NCAA Tournament write-ups, those have been a little bit of a different story, but here in the NIT, the CBI, the CIT, it has been a lot of fun. We had Indiana State laying the points in this one, and they get the job done. 190. Indiana State now 22-14-1 against the spread, and they win this game despite the fact that Utah was an absolute incinerator from three-point range. They went 17 of 29 from 3 and 5 of 10 at the free throw line. They literally shot better from three-point range than they did at the charity stripe. Indiana State, they shoot 12 of 34 from 3, actually a little bit below their average, but the way that they were able to get the job done in this one, they win the rebound battle 35-29. They also win the turnover battle 9-7, and Robbie Avila, 26 points, 10 rebounds. He was tremendous for this bunch. And then Julian Larry, he sometimes gets lost in the shuffle a little bit. 15 points, 8 assists. He did a nice job as well. And then for Utah, you did have Davion Smith once again have a nice performance. 28 points, 7 boards, 6 assists. He has been incredible here. And he went 6 of 6 from three-point range. So he was able to keep the team afloat for as long as humanly possible. But Indiana State out there in the state of Indiana, they win, they cover, they get an over. And we saw the overhit in Seton Hall versus Georgia as well. 84-67 the final, which I think that the committee right now has a lot of egg on their face. You could have had one of these two teams, or you could have had Virginia went like 50 minutes of real time without scoring a point against Colorado State. So great work, committee, but for Seton Hall, they did a nice job of being able to guard the arc. 5 of 26 is what Georgia was able to shoot from three-point range. Georgia did have 16 big points in this one from Silas Emery Jr., but Seton Hall completely dominated this game from start to finish. They were up double figures pretty much throughout. Kadari Richmond, another nice, well-rounded performance. 15 points, 9 boards, 6 assists. Hey, Dre Davis, 19 points, 9 boards, 4 assists of his own for Seton Hall. They go 8 of 20 from three-point range. They were able to do a nice job winning that battle on the glass, 45-32. So that does set up an NIT final where right now we're finding Indiana State on these openers as a 2.5-point favorite and a total of 158.5. I'm doing this about 35 minutes after the game between Seton Hall and Georgia wrapped up, so we'll see where this line moves, but I personally did set Seton Hall as a 1-point favorite and more of a total right around about a 157, so I would be looking at that money line of Seton Hall and the under, but I'll dive into that a little bit more tomorrow since a lot of books, they just have yet to post an opener on this game, but do note that as of right now, would be looking at Seton Hall and would be looking at the under, but that is what we saw in college basketball on Tuesday, and if you're looking at the trends that we're seeing associated with college basketball, overall, last 7 days, this is all tournaments, NIT, CBI, what have you. We've been seeing things be underwhelming. Last 7 days, 12 unders, 6 overs. We did see a pair of overs in the NIT semifinal, but favorites, they're really doing some good work right now. 11-7 against the spread over the last 7 days. Both favorites were able to win on Tuesday as well, as Seton Hall closed as about a 5.5-point favorite. And overall for the season, overs heading at 50.9%, 2,878 overs, 2,776 unders, with favorites hitting at 50.7% against the spread. So that's what we're seeing in college basketball right now, and that's what we all got on Tuesday. Now let's chat with our good friend Blake Lovell about the Final Four, how Alabama's been able to get here, and we'll pose to him the question as well. Can anyone take down UConn? That's up next right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the Houston Family Podcast. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the Houston Family Podcast, and it is always great to be joined by this man as Blake Lovell does tremendous work over at Southeastern 14. Take a look at this great game of college basketball that we all know and love. He's been doing an amazing job all season long, taking a look at all these teams, and now that we're down to the Final Four and we've got an SEC team in there, perfect time to be able to get them on. You're able to follow Blake on Twitter/X at the Blake Lovell. Last name is spelled Lovell all together. And Blake, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
No, thanks as always for having me, Greg.
Always great to have you aboard, Blake. And we've got Alabama in the Final Four. And just in terms of Alabama being the team that made it from the SEC to the Final Four, was there any surprise from you? And just what have you seen from Alabama in this tournament run? Because, I mean, it certainly has been one that has been intriguing because many people, including myself, were maybe a little bit down on Alabama, and they've been able to play really their most efficient all season long here in the tournament.
Yeah, they have certainly, like you said, had quite a run to get here. You know, that was the thing we always talked about during the season with Alabama is sometimes they can just be good enough offensively to outscore people. And, I mean, that's kind of what we talk about when you get into an NCAA tournament scenario where all you have to do is just outscore somebody for, 6 games and you win a national championship. And now they've done it through 4. And I think, though, what's interesting, and I know some of the scores will be a little deceiving, especially that first game against Charleston. They give up 96 points, but let's be honest, that game was over pretty much, early into the second half where Alabama's up 30 or whatever with 8-9 minutes left in the second half. I kind of have to throw that out a little bit. But I think their defense, maybe it's more of key situation defense has been much better than we saw it during the regular season, especially towards the end of the regular season where they're giving up 117 to Kentucky, 105 to Florida, 102 to Florida again in the SEC tournament. They've just been much better at that. And I think that is something that's really stood out in some of these games. They're able to make a few more plays defensively where they don't have to score 100 points every single game. But we know they're capable of it. I mean, they scored 109 against Charleston, 89 against Carolina, 89 against the Clemson team that, have been tremendous defensively. I think that's it, is you're just kind of seeing an Alabama team that's putting a little bit more into it now defensively, even if they're still giving up points. They don't have to be perfect defensively. That's the thing. When you're as good as you are offensively as they are, they don't have to be a great defensive team. They just have to be good enough. And that's been, what's been able to kind of get them by to this point. And obviously, it feels like they've had different people step up in every single game, whether it's, having the Grant Nelson game, the Jaron Stevenson game, Rylan Griffin, Estrada. Keep going down the line. Nick Pringle had a huge game against Clemson. And we've not even talked about Mark Sears, one of the best players in the country. So that's been the story for Alabama, and yeah, they've certainly earned their spot in getting here.
Yep, with Alabama, the offense has been so efficient, but now, as we know, they have to go up against that juggernaut in UConn, and I don't know forget the remaining 3 teams here in the NCAA tournament. If any other team in the country at this point is able to take down UConn with the way that they're playing, and just how do you evaluate this matchup between Alabama and UConn, a UConn team that in their last 10 NCAA tournament games has won every one of them by 13-plus points.
Yeah, it's tough. No other way to put it. I guess, for me, if I'm trying to craft sort of the ultimate upset of a UConn. I feel like Alabama is one of those teams that you can at least put in there because of one reason, and we know what that is. It's because they're going to put up so many three-point attempts that what happens if they just are having a great night and they're just making threes? Like, that is why I think I've talked about Alabama so much this year is they're just so hard to put away because you know they're going to keep chucking up three after three after three. And I think that is something where if you're just looking at this and saying, how does Alabama have a chance here? Defensively, I couldn't tell you how Alabama's going to stop UConn. And then again, you just kind of have to hope that UConn has a bad night. That's kind of what it comes down to. But offensively, can Alabama keep up with UConn to where they're not another one of those teams that just gets completely blown out because of how well UConn's playing? Sure, because they do shoot it so well. And if they can just, maybe it's going to be more about the volume of shots more than anything against UConn because you feel like that gives you the best chance. So that would be the only thing I would say is, let's say we're talking about this wild, wild upset and Alabama pulls it off, they get the victory. It's going to be because they just happen to go, 15 or 40 from three or something, which, again, Alabama is more than capable of doing. We know that. I just think that's something where if you're trying to find the formula, to me, it's more of a team like that than, let's say, a team that plays a much slower tempo and is trying to just beat UConn in the half court. I just don't think Alabama would have a chance to do that. They're going to have to keep it their kind of style up and down. If they can do it and they can play a little defense, then maybe there's always a shot.
Yep, there is always an opportunity, and I do think that we've got ourselves a very interesting Final Four that is going to be going down as Blake Lovell, who does amazing work over at Southeastern 14, is joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And then in the other matchup, I want to get your thoughts here with NC State, a team that needed a banked-in three at the buzzer to force overtime against Virginia in the ACC tournament, and we all know how Virginia looked in the NCAA tournament, has now made the Final Four and is facing off against Purdue. I'm not sure how you take a look at this matchup, but this is the ultimate. Do you trust in what we've seen all season long from NC State, a team that has lost 14 whopping games, or do you trust in the current form where they have literally been the textbook definition of survive and advance, just like they did so many years ago under Jimmy V?
Yeah, I saw the number, whatever it was like minus 1% chance of them doing this, pulling this off and winning 9 games in a row against the opponents that they've done it against. And that is just a remarkable stat. Look, we always say it's about getting hot at the right time, and there is no team that further kind of personifies that than this NC State team. They got hot at the right time, and they're kind of in a situation here where, like you said, they're still the one that has no pressure on them. And think about how many games in a row now they played where they've had no pressure. It's all been on the other team and really trying to figure out, okay, how do we stop this team that is just as red hot as you can be? And that's what Purdue's going to feel against this team. Now, of course, we all know the matchups. Everybody's looking at and really excited to see kind of how this plays out when you have Edey in there, what can Burns do, all these things. And I think what I like about NC State, we always talk about teams like this, Greg, it's just they really do a good job of taking care of the ball. I think the way they value the ball, that's been really important in some of these games, and the experience factor, right? We talk about teams that have gone far, made these kind of runs in the NCAA tournament in recent years. They've all been kind of experienced teams. And you think about, the lineup that they sport with all the older guys. And, of course, it's also interesting, our favorite guy who, of course, had a rough season this year, Missouri, to say the least. Mo Diarra comes over from Missouri and has played, quite a role as well for this NC State team. And I think that's also interesting to see just, again, what the front court's been able to do with these guys. But I think Purdue is a really tough draw here. But again, how many draws haven't been tough for NC State at this point? But I do feel like with the Zach Edey effect, could be a problem for this NC State team in that game.
Yeah, Zach Edey can be a problem for a lot of people, and I know that he is caught in some strays on social media trying to be like, oh, he's only doing this because he's tall. The referees have no idea what they're calling, and I don't necessarily think that they're wrong in that the referees have no idea what they're calling, but that's for everyone. Like, they had 2 different 3-point lines out there in the women's NCAA tournament, so trusting the NCAA to get anything correct, yeah, you're putting a lot of blind faith in something that you should not, to say the least. But the guy has been absolutely amazing, and I do think that it would be interesting to see one of those 2 teams, NC State or Purdue, go up against UConn in a national title game, because at this point, I was mentioning it, I don't know if any team would be able to take down UConn in any sort of matchup. I do feel like Purdue is one of those teams that I wouldn't pick Purdue to win by any stretch of the imagination, but I could imagine them being one of the best speed bumps, for lack of a better term, against UConn.
Yeah, I agree, because that would be a game that is played in the half court. And I think, again, we see, right, what Purdue's been able to do to teams just in the half court with the Edey effect. And I'm with you. I think that would be a team that probably has one of the best chances in that kind of setting to do it, just because you're talking about two teams that are going to play kind of that methodical sort of style because they get exactly what they want. And that's one of the things that really impresses me most about those two teams is it just seems like every time you watch them play, they get exactly what they want. You don't necessarily look back and say, man, those two teams took a lot of terrible shots, because we know what Purdue wants to do. We know what UConn wants to do. And I think just, their ability to kind of run and execute what they want to do and make sure their guys that need to touch the ball on every single possession pretty much. That's what is most impressive. So, yeah, I think that would be a really, interesting matchup. And I know that's kind of the betting odds favor that matchup at this point, but we wouldn't be too shocked about these two being two that are the final ones standing, just based on, you look at what they've done this season, what they've accomplished, and it'd be quite a championship game if that's the case.
No doubt about it. And there is just so much intrigue when it comes to these Final Four games that we're going to be seeing. And there's a lot of intrigue as well in terms of building up for next year as well, as Blake Lovell does amazing work over at Southeastern 14. Joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. As we know, the Southeastern Conference is not going to be having 14 teams anymore in the next few days, as next time we see them take the court, they'll have at least 16 teams. Who knows what's going to be happening this summer, but that said, we have seen one big coaching change already out there in the SEC. Jerry Stackhouse, he got canned, and you're out there in the great state of Tennessee. We did see Mark Byington go over from James Madison. Just what were your thoughts on this hire? Because I feel like Vanderbilt hasn't necessarily whiffed on some of these hires with bringing in someone like Bryce Drew, bringing in Jerry Stackhouse, but I look at those previous two hires, they were just really bit by the injury bug, and you just hope that Byington doesn't fall victim of the same thing, because it feels like Vanderbilt, regardless of who the coach has been perhaps one of the most unlucky programs in the country the past decade or so.
And to me, like you said, I thought it was certainly a good hire, because, you're talking about somebody who, when you look at the overall numbers, like Byington has had, and this is the one thing that bothered Vanderbilt fans a little bit, they're like, well, this guy's been in the tournament, one time in 12 years or whatever it is, and it's just a lucky year for him. But I think what you're seeing is kind of a trajectory with him where he's had his best years in the NIL/portal era. And I think that's always important. People like to look at the full body of work, but think about how much the game has changed in 5 seasons even. And you're talking about going back 12 years for a guy where things were so different back then. And, Georgia Southern, James Madison, tough places to win. And so I think that's where you look at it. But again, Greg, from being in Nashville previously, like for Vanderbilt, no matter who the coach is, it's always going to come down to, is Vanderbilt going to put the resources into it? Are they going to give that coach an opportunity to succeed? And, some of the struggles with Jerry Stackhouse, I get it. They struggled to kind of recruit those top guys, certainly not to the level that a Bryce Drew did and all that. But there were probably still some limitations that probably frustrated Jerry Stackhouse, just like they did Bryce Drew, just like they, did other coaches previously. But is Mark Byington going to get that same kind of effect? Because what I've seen is, it looks like Vanderbilt is willing to put the money in to get the NIL going the way it needs to go to stay up with all the other guys. Think about who you're chasing in the SEC and the amount of money that's going in NIL-wise for some of these other schools. To me, that's what it's going to come down to, because he's a great coach. The offensive mind that he is, I think that's something that will really appeal to fans to try to get them back in the building. From watching that James Madison team, they run a very fun style. They're going to get after you on defense, and he's going to try to do the same thing with his Vanderbilt team. And so I'm most curious about that. If he gets the opportunity to go get the players he needs to be successful, I think he will be successful, because I think he's a good coach. And I think what he did at James Madison was really just kind of the beginning of something where you could be looking at a guy who has a really special career, but it's all going to come down to Vanderbilt maybe getting out of their own way sometimes.
Yeah, with Vanderbilt, it certainly has been difficult for them, really, in so many sports other than baseball, where they have been just so gosh darn dominant for decades upon decades. But I do think that that's going to be a big key. And just what have you made out of this coaching hiring cycle in general in college basketball? I would ask you about the transfer portal, but I think it would be easier to make a list of guys that are not in the transfer portal rather than the guys that are. And just a big giant crapshoot at this point. I just don't have any takeaways right now until we see some of the dominoes fall. But that said, we do know quite a bit of what we're getting in terms of some of these coaches. And I really have been impressed by a lot of these teams that have gone out and hired the coaches. I just take a look around and I can't really think of one truly bad hire that I dislike.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think you look at a lot of these and, obviously we know how this works. Fans are always going to pull out the biggest name there is and assume you're just going to go get the guy that has the biggest name. And it never works that way. And sometimes that's for the better because, it's more than just winning the press conference. It's trying to go out and find the guy who's going to put you in a position to be successful short-term and long-term. And I think some of these, you're looking at teams who are really looking at guys trying to take that next step, right? Whether we're talking about a Dusty May at Michigan. Yes, got to the Final Four. I think he's a very still kind of underrated coach. People are trying to say maybe that's just the outlier. Well, how's he going to fare at Michigan? I think he's going to be fine, whether it's a Pat Kelsey going to Louisville. Like, these are guys who we've been talking about for years, getting the opportunities at the bigger type schools, and now they're getting that chance to do it. Even to Jake Diepler, right? Like taking over at Ohio State. You look at kind of what they did to finish, and now him getting a chance there. I think that's kind of been the theme, right? Is just seeing guys like this take over in some of these big spots. Again, Vanderbilt's another example with Byington. You've just got a guy who's taking that next step into a power conference type program. DeVries, certainly, at West Virginia. There's just a lot of examples of that. And I'm curious to see how those guys kind of fare because we know it is different. And I mentioned a minute ago why it's different. There's a lot more NIL stuff in play. A lot of other stuff like that you have to juggle and balance at those kind of schools. So I'm excited to see how some of these guys fare and some of these spots and kind of see what happens. A couple of those other moves I thought were very interesting. Preston Spradlin, come from Morehead State. Now he takes over for Byington at James Madison. I think he's always been someone that's looked at as kind of one of those really top rising coaches out there. So I'm very curious to see kind of how he does there. And also, I'll say this, Greg, like a Rob Lanier, at Rice. He gets fired at SMU after kind of taking the program in a good direction, it seemed. And now we know Andy Enfield's taken over at SMU, but I think Rob Lanier is someone who most people think kind of got the raw end of the deal there. And so can he do something at a place that's kind of trying to get back some success they used to have? And so, yeah, there's been a lot of interesting coaching changes.
Yep, there certainly has been. And nice to see a few D2 guys getting a shot as well, because I take a look at a lot of these D2 guys that have come up to the D1 level. So many of them have been able to put it together, have been able to have so much success. Heck, you take a look at Bucky McMillan. That's a guy that wasn't even at the D2 level. He was a high school coach, got Sanford all the way to the NCAA tournament. We're seeing a lot of fast risers out here in college basketball, which we love to see. And a man that has been a very fast riser, that'd be you, Blake. You rise every single day with your incredible insights on this great game that we all know and love. You do a great job. Take a look at this game over at Southeastern 14 and so much more. And let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, always appreciate it, Greg. Like you said, all of our SEC stuff you can find over at Southeastern 14 on YouTube. Yeah, we'll be previewing that Alabama UConn matchup this week and some other things as well. So you can check it out there. And all my other college basketball stuff, find me on Twitter/X at the Blake Lovell.
Absolutely. Blake does an incredible job taking a look at this great game that we all know and love, and every single time he joins the show, lends tremendous insight. So big thanks to him for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And coming up next, well, unfortunately, we don't have any college basketball games for Wednesday, so we'll give you a little bit of a roundup as to what we've been seeing in the coaching carousel thus far. That's up next, right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Craig Peterson, now a part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Well, it's a pleasure to be joined by our good friend Blake Lovell. He does such great work over at Southeastern 14. Every single time he joins the show, he lends such good insight. So it was great to be able to have him aboard. A big thanks to Blake for joining me in last segment. Now let's give you guys just a little bit of a roundup as to what we're seeing in the coaching carousel right now. We don't have any games for Wednesday, and quite frankly, we are down to just 4 games in college basketball. We have to treat every single one of these like gold because at this point we just don't have too many of them remaining. But that said, we've seen a lot of coaching moves already made. Now, there are some vacancies that are out there. The USC vacancy is certainly one that is of top of mind, as Andy Enfield, he decided that he was going to leave USC and instead he is going to be heading on over to SMU, which is a big time move for SMU. They are heading on over to the ACC, and they did need to make a little bit of an upgrade. They let go of Rob Lanier, who I thought did a solid job, and now he's at Rice. This was a good get for Rice. Scott Para just was not really cutting it over there while he was with the Rice Owls. They had a rough year this year, so that is one that I think honestly is going to work out well for all parties. But I do take a look at USC as being one of the big time job openings that we should be watching out for. Certainly the St. Louis coaching vacancy, that is one that is out there right now, and many are speculating as to whether or not they are going to be waiting for the NIT to conclude, because you've got Josh Schertz, who's done amazing work over at Indiana State. He's apparently a top candidate there, but we shall see what happens. But in terms of the coaching moves that we've been seeing over the last few days, Austin Clonch, who served as a really good head coach over at Nichols, he was an assistant for Alabama this past season. He got hired on by the Meep UTSA Roadrunners. I think that that's going to be good. They were already playing an up-tempo style. Clonch was always able to get his teams to do a solid job of being able to generate turnovers, so that is one that I liked. We talked about Mark Byington with our good friend Blake Lovell. I think that just as long as Vanderbilt can stay away from some of those injury issues, that's going to be very big for them. And if you're looking at the current vacancies that we've got open, I alluded to two of them, St. Louis, USC, UT Rio Grande Valley has yet to hire on a new man, Matt Figger, who came over from Austin Peay, just was not cutting it in general. Pepperdine let go of Lorenzo Romaru. Man, when he lost Isaiah Thomas, that went completely downhill for him. Long Beach State, after they famously let go of Dan Monson, they have yet to hire on a coach as of now. This is being recorded Tuesday night, so this could be different at the time that you're listening to this podcast, but Preston Spradlin, he is now out of the fold as well. He took that James Madison job, and he did really good work at Morehead State. Very well-rounded team. I like that hire, so right now we're waiting to see what happens over at Morehead State. Justin Hudson was let go of by Fresno State. They're currently looking for a coach. You've got Detroit Mercy, who let go of Mike Davis, which, I mean, shock, surprise, surprise. He was relying upon his own son to be able to save his job for many, many years, and now he's been let go of. Cornell, they have to try to replace Brian Earl, and I think that that's going to be a very tricky one. Brian Earl, he decided that he was going to be taking the head coaching job of William and Mary, so he gets to coach up not just William, not just Mary, but both of them, but that distinct style of playing super duper up tempo. Over the last few seasons, they were playing very low and slow. I think that that's going to be a little bit of a shock to the system for William and Mary, but now having out of the fold Pat Kelsey, who decided to take that Louisville job, I do think that that's going to be throwing teams a little bit off guard, and Brian Earl just knows basketball in general. I like that hire, and I just take a look at the board, and I'm trying to think of a coaching hire that I look at and I say, oh, that was a bad hire. Maybe Rob Hassan, he's going to be going over to UIC. I wasn't necessarily bullish on the work that he did while he was over at UAB. Luke Yaklich has been let go, and I always liked Luke Yaklich. He just didn't get results at UIC. I can't blame them for moving on from him, and Yaklich was able to do a solid job with the UIC defense, but no consistency with that team whatsoever. I just take a look up and down the board, and it's just really hard to be like, yep, this is a really bad move. Like Jake Diebler, I think that Ohio State was a little bit of a prisoner of the moment when they decided to give him the full-time job, but that guy backed it the heck up for Ohio State in the back half of the season. He earned that job, in my opinion, and even though Ohio State, they could have went out there, they could have gotten a bigger name, much like Michigan was able to get Dusty May. I think that that's a tremendous hire for them. Like, Dusty May got Florida Atlantic to the Final Four. You can say what you want about that Final Four run. He got Florida Atlantic to the Final Four. Like, the dude can coach. There's no question about it. He's going to be solid over there at Michigan, and you can tell that the Juwan Howard era, well, that was just running its course, to say the least. I'm very curious to see what Marshall does now that they can Dan Tony, and now Cornelius Jackson is going to be taking over for him. For Cornelius Jackson, he's been on the staff for quite a while, so it's essentially just a passing down of the torch there. And then I was alluding to it a little bit, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this tomorrow. We're seeing some D2 guys getting a shot at the D1 level, as Ben McCollum, he has been hired by Drake, and I really like this move, and I do like the fact that more of these schools are deciding, you know what, we are going to be looking at the Division II level, because we have noticed a lot of these guys have taken on these jobs from the D2 level. Josh Schertz, he was a prime example of that. For Ben McCollum, he takes over after he was very good in the D2 level, I believe, over at like Northwest Missouri. I might have gotten that mistaken, but he was able to lead them to quite a few NCAA tournaments. I think that that was a very good hire from them. If you're looking at another guy that went from the D2 level up to the D1 level, what we saw over at CSUN this past season, I thought that that was absolutely tremendous. Mark Newman, he was able to do a tremendous job on that front as well. You've got a few of these coaching jobs that it was just filled by the interim. I was alluding to it with Ohio State. Phil Martelli Jr., he's now the full-time guy over at Bryant. Yay, verily there. But I do take a look at this one. John Schulman, he is going to be taking over after he was at Alabama of Huntsville, which has been a machine. As for Alabama Huntsville, they went from having Lenny Acuff, who is currently the coach over at Lipscomb, to John Schulman, who led them to 112-39 with their record over the last 5 seasons, so that has been a nice stepping stone for them. You've got Chris Mack, who's going to be going to Charleston. That was one that happened, I believe, within the last 48 or so hours. Maybe I was a little bit asleep at the wheel, but that, in my opinion, if you're rating these top coaching moves, I really like that one. Like, with Chris Mack, it's very clear as to why things fell apart with the job over at Louisville, and I don't think that it was necessarily all his fault. Now, did he do the world's greatest job there? No, but he was a winner while he was over at Xavier. He won big time while he was over at Xavier. This is a good time get for a Charleston team that they were able to experience quite a bit of prosperity under Pat Kelsey. I think that this is a very good coach out there in the Coastal Conference, and I do think that there's going to be quite a bit of success out there. I'm very curious to see what Houston Christian does as well, with Craig Doty coming into the fold, as they were under the tutelage of Ron Cottrell since 1990. Doty was over at Emporia State, which is an underrated D2 school that's out there in the Midwest. I think that he's going to be able to do a relatively solid job, and we are noticing more and more of these smaller schools, they are going to the D2 level. Paul Carousel, he is going to be taking over at IUPUI after Matt Crenshaw. Well, he was putting the PU and IUPUI in for Carousel. He was coaching at the University of Indianapolis. That's a D2 school out there in the Great Lakes Conference, and that's one of the better conferences out there at the D2 level, and we notice a lot of his players going from the D2 level up to the D1 level and having quite a bit of success. He was able to lead them to back-to-back D2 NCAA tournaments. He was able to be a monster out there in the Great Lakes Valley Conference, which is one of the better D2 conferences out there, so that's big. And for Long Beach State, I misspoke. I was saying that Dan Monson had not had his job filled yet. Chris Ecker, he is going to be the gentleman that takes over for him. Ecker was on the San Diego State staff the last few seasons, so that's a move that has been made. We're noticing a few retreads with Conzo Martin back at Missouri State, which it went so well for him when he was at Missouri State nearly 2 decades ago. We shall see what happens here. Pepperdine, they also have filled their coaching position. Ed Schilling, he is going to be getting the job. He is going to be moving on up after he was a Grand Canyon assistant. So that is going to be one that is going to be interesting to take a look at. And then Siena, they hire on Jerry McNamara. I actually really like this move. Jerry McNamara does a little bit too well about the mid-majors out there in the northeast part of the country. I believe that his Syracuse team played Siena once or twice. I don't think that it was in the NCAA tournament, but he takes over a program that just for the most part has been relatively solid. Siena just had Murphy's Law hit them. All sorts of injuries. Carm Masiello, he was always a relatively solid coach, so I do think that they're going to be able to have quite a bit of success moving forward as well. So we've got a lot that's going on. Then the Jared Calhoun hire that was made by Utah State. Calhoun was over at Youngstown State, was really able to improve that program year after year. I think that that is going to be a big one as well. I've alluded to the Pac-12 hirings with Kyle Smith now being over at Stanford. Washington State, it looks like they are going to be going with David Riley. I don't know if this is confirmed or not, but it looks like David Riley, he is going to be able to get that job, and if that is the case, I do think that that's a relatively solid gift for them. Riley, a very much fast riser, so we shall see what happens on that front. But I just look at a lot of these hires, not a lot of gripes for me quite yet that could be very much subject to change, like even Ethan Faulkner. He is going to be someone that's going to be taking over at Youngstown State, it does appear, so I do think that he is going to be able to do a nice job moving forward, and I believe that he was over at Toledo, so we've got a lot of good hires that are going to be made, and I'm going to be paying attention to all of these throughout the offseason. Like I said, that St. Louis vacancy, I think that we could be seeing them going with the gentleman that is going to be out there on the floor in the NIT and Josh Schertz over the next few days, and we're certainly going to be keeping busy on this front. We have seen already north of 40 coaching changes that have been made this offseason. There's a lot to be able to parse through, and I'm going to do my best all offseason long to be able to keep these straight for you guys. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, go Seeps, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, do have one of 2 ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @JUD_41. Keep in mind, letters CM, name does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way, that is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. We'll throw in this as well. I forgot to mention this before. I am not going to be one that's going to be like tweeting out or anything like that, like, oh, I speculate this person is going to get job X just because this is still a sports betting show. I primarily focus there, and there's just no value whatsoever in speculating who's going to be a coach. There's no team that is going to be looking for a coach that is probably going to be a future worth taking in terms of winning the NCAA tournament title, even at a school like USC. They're just not worth that sort of value. So we've got 7 months to be able to decipher this. You want to be seeing who all comes into the transfer portal, because a guy can look like an absolute home run hire, but if they do absolutely nothing to bring in talent in the transfer portal, in the recruiting front, what have you, it's going to be all for nothing. So do want to throw that in there as well, and do want to throw in there a big thanks to Blake Lovell of Southeastern 14 for joining me in the last segment, coming at you guys every single day throughout the college basketball season, and that means I'm coming at you once again tomorrow, and we'll be with you guys every single day throughout the offseason as well. We're with you 366 days of the year this year, so I'll chat at you once again tomorrow. Thanks so much for tuning in.